Why am I not getting better? Common question seen in the OCD community when people have been stuck chronically anxious for a very long time. So we've got to look at what exactly is happening there. Well, usually OCD and anxiety simmers away in the background, stays sort of latched, sort of chronically in that sort of coasting phase where you're going along, not feeling great, but you don't know what to do to get better, and you're just in that position, sort of hovering along there. Now, because OCD recovery is hugely misunderstood and it takes a lot more work than most people presume, most people are in that position. Most people are in that position. And then they think when they go from place to place for help, they think, I'm a lost cause, I'm treatment resistant, I'm never going to get better. And that then becomes the problem because it all becomes in their head more and more in their mind that that belief that they're a lost cause, nothing's worked, they've tried everything, so they're not going to improve past that point. Now, what happens then is they become hopeless. They only want to expend the energy to get better, which they think will make them make steps ahead, if not staying in that position that's uncomfortable, but comfortable enough, which becomes the coasting position. Now, the other mistake that people make is that people presume that it's like something doing it to them. So it's like, it becomes like this. Why is this happening to me? This shouldn't be happening. This shouldn't be this hard. This shouldn't be like this. But it is. OCD is a pretty resilient thing. If it was easy, everyone would just be recovering like that. And forums and Facebook groups wouldn't be very busy, right? There wouldn't be many people in there talking. But the reality is that most people with chronic OCD are still suffering on some level. The reason being, they don't understand how to recover, how to disable the OCD in that chronic form. And they also haven't done the things needed to improve. It's as simple as that. I try and keep it simple because it often gets misinterpreted so much. The problem is also with what people call recovery, because they don't want to offend people. And that becomes a problem. Recovery, by definition, needs to be the absence of chronic guilt, chronic anxiety, chronic shame. It needs to be the absence of that. The OCD, all the OCD problems that cause the suffering, that needs to have gone. That doesn't mean you're never going to be re-triggered by an anxious situation. You will, but if it's chronic anxiety, then that's the suffering again. So it needs to be the absence of that. Now, the problem is, what happens is when people improve and get better, they then often mistake that for recovery then when they suddenly then get bad again, because they go up and down in that sort of OCD roller coaster where it's sort of laying dormant. The more scary fears are laying dormant once again. So they feel relief, think they've recovered, then bang, and then they become frustrated that they sort of feel like they kidded themselves to get to that point and they didn't in fact recover. So recovery has to be the absence of that. Now, along the journey, you can get to sort of 90% recovery, being living fine. It doesn't make much difference that you haven't fully recovered. That's pretty good anyway. You're living well enough. So great functioning, okay? But the problem is when we start calling recovery just sort of putting up with, lumping the symptoms up, as I often explain it, and sort of just going along, and that's you're functioning well, but you're still feeling chronic anxiety, panic attacks every few days or whatever. And then people say, well, that's my recovery. Well, that's not recovery. You can't say something's my recovery when it doesn't do what the definition of recovery is. So we've got this notion of not wanting to offend people because people have an idea of what they want recovery to be to them, but that's not actually recovery. So that then leads to people becoming confused and lost, thinking, is that all I've got to look forward to? So we need to be realistic with what it is, okay? Now, I have to be blunt about that because otherwise this gets misinterpreted, like most things in OCD, easily get misinterpreted. And then we move away from the key fact of what it is. So recovery is the absence of chronic anxiety, chronic guilt, and so on, where you can't tell the difference between before you had OCD and OCD. That doesn't mean that you haven't still got OCD. OCD is most likely a genetic thing that makes that anxious cycle become apparent, and we experience that, makes us more susceptible to that anxious loop and chronic guilt, etc. But you don't need rid of that the same as an alcoholic in sobriety doesn't need it, because 90% of the time, 99% of the time, they can't tell the difference, they're fine. That's recovery, okay? So it's not the absence of OCD, it's the absence of suffering. Longer term as well has to be included, otherwise someone could just feel relief intermittently for the moment, then define that as recovery. So you have to be very clear with that. And I have to be very clear with these things, because if I'm not very clear with it, people get lost. They think, well, I was feeling better then, why am I not feeling better now? So you need to know why. The only reason that you're stuck is because you're scared of something. You're scared of something, you have a fear of something, the nervous system's fired up and it's not releasing. That's what's going on there, okay? Now, when the question in this video is, why am I not improving? It's because you're still scared of something. You're still scared most likely of anxiety symptoms and fear and so on. And it's that combination, that interaction both with OCD and that interaction with both the feared content. That's the reason people are stuck. You need to move away from that idea of it doing it to you. It's so unfair. This shouldn't be happening to me. This is the worst thing ever. I spent years in that loop. This shouldn't be happening. Why is this happening to me? This is so terrible. I'm an exception. This is the worst thing ever. Got me nowhere. A zero return investment. So you have to be really realistic. We have to be. Because in OCD, we can spend all day ruminating about these things. All day, all day, all day. So you have to be very specific on what's happening. That doesn't mean rigid. It's being realistic. For an alcoholic, that means the realistic awareness that if they drink again, they're realistically going to have a problem in their life. And they may bounce back and forth between that for many years. Can I drink? Can I just drink one or two and that's back and forth until they're aware, that's not going to lead to the life that I want. What's the life that I want? The life that I want is a position where day to day it's balanced. Day to day I have mental energy to direct into how I want my life to go about, how I want to go about my life. That is the process that humans are working towards to give themselves the best opportunities in their day-to-day life and functioning. And with OCD, that's it. We're trying to get rid of that chronic guilt and chronic anxiety so we have the additional energy to be able to do the things we want in life and feel at peace watching a film, sitting in the bath, all these things which before are consumed by chronic anxiety, chronic guilt, physical symptoms, and so on. A journey that I lived for many, many years. So that's really important. So it's the only reason you're stuck is because there's a belief there. So you can, of course, we can all say, we've all been to multiple people for help, and we can say, oh, well, that's not work, that's not work, that's not work. It's not a case of, don't look at it like, oh, I'm treatment resistant, this hasn't worked, this hasn't worked. There's a belief. The only reason you're experiencing this today in the present moment is because of fear of something. That's it. That's it. But it takes time to realize that, feel that, embody that. And I have to be really clear about it because there is so much counteracting information for the last 20, 30, how many ever years we've been reading about OCD online, books and so on, where people say, oh, even the definition of recovery is very wishy-washy, like many things, how OCD is discussed. Yeah, some people can recover, everyone's recovery is different, some people are up, some people are down, some people physical symptoms, some people that doesn't work for them, some people this. And it's like you feel hopeless because you're like, wait a minute, that's a medical website, it's a big long 10-page medical document saying that the success rates of recovery is this percentage, that percentage. Oh my God, what a disaster, how unlucky I am to have this disorder. Forget it. The reason those statistics are the way they are is because OCD is misunderstood. So of course they're going to get that data. because the people coming in the door are presenting with still feeling anxious because they've got a strong belief, still feeling anxious because they're still scared of this. And because that isn't seen, of course, that's all just getting marked down as, oh, yes, that person hasn't improved because of ... Oh, how many sessions have you done? Oh, Oh, how many exposures have you done? And that's the mistake. Even the mistake is with the phrase ERP is the gold standard. Of course, ERP exposures. What is an exposure? It's just facing a fear in human life. We forget the terms. If I was scared of this box of chocolates here and I approach a box of chocolates over and over, I'm going to learn to see in reality there's nothing to be scared of. There's just a box of chocolates and a box with some chocolates in it. That's it. No other irrational fears in my mind that conjure up around that box of chocolates. Okay? It will see through that illusion of fear. Now, the problem is that exposures are a key part of recovery. Okay? Facing a fear. That's not in of itself rocket science. It's pretty obvious when we look at it. Like, if there's something you're scared of, you face it and you see it's not scary. Okay? It's not some magical tool that gets us magical method. It's just facing something in reality and seeing it for what it is. That's basically what it is. But OCD can morph around that in various ways and attach to other fears, like fear of being a bad person, fear of being chronically anxious forever. So unless we learn how to break those down, how to change our relationship with those through breaking down the irrational beliefs associated, OCD just morphs and sort of fits snugly in a tiny gap just out of reach from that exposure. Then people say, oh, exposures didn't work for me. Oh my God, I must be true. I've been down all that path, and that's exactly the case. So to do what I do for work every day, I have to be able to work with every fear, every situation, every type of situation that someone's been scared of for a long time, and personality, how that's intercepted into their personality and daily functioning. You can't just approach this with exposure, relief. Most people don't recover with just exposures. Let's face that fact. Most people don't recover with just exposures. There's a lot more to it than that. And that's key to be aware of. And the other things that's key to be aware of around that is that it's not, you can't compare OCD in everyone is different. Not in a different of like, this one person is far worse than other people. They tend to, like chronic OCD and mild OCD, big difference. Chronic OCD in most people, about the same, moves around depending on beliefs, but there's not, I very much doubt there's much difference in genetics there. But what people do is they start comparing to everyone. Oh my God, my friend had anxiety at school and they just took a few meds and then it all went. Why has that not happened to me? I must be the worst case. Because that's taking a look at anxiety in the broad spectrum, not OCD. And it's not specifically zooming in on what that specific situation's like. Someone might have been avoiding for 15 years OCD. Someone may have only had it for the last couple of months, but really triggered recently. So once they're over that trigger, it then lays dormant for many years or something like that. There's a lot of variations in how OCD operates. But we need to be able to work with any situation. And OCD is hugely misunderstood. You see people saying they work with OCD in 1 month's experience, 3 months experience. It's a very complicated thing. It's not something that you can just learn in a very short time. It's hugely complex. I mean, let's just take sensory motor OCD. If I was to sit down and write a book just on sensory motor OCD, you could write a lot. But there is online barely any information on sensory motor OCD. Hugely misunderstood. Where the sensation itself is the exposure. People often try and invent exposures for it where it doesn't need exposure because the sensation itself is the exposure. And it's primarily the fear of being stuck forever and the fear of it never unlatching that's the problem. So with that, you've got to think, well, if sensory motor you could write a huge amount on, how many different types of OCD fears are there? Tons. How many different ways can they interrupt someone's life? Many. So therefore, the amount that can be written on OCD is huge. If OCD was as simple as thoughts are thoughts, and that's all there is to it, then I would have only had to tweet about 10 tweets. But that's how simplistically it's usually written about in so many cases. Thoughts are thoughts. I can't tell you how many sessions I paid for and went for to where I was just hearing thoughts are thoughts, leave thoughts there, you're interacting with thought, you don't need to talk about thought, you don't need to worry. But I was chronically guilty and chronically anxious for years, so that obviously wasn't working. So thoughts are thoughts. We would love it to be that simplistic. We would really love it to. But again, to not cause offense, what we do is we say, oh, we believe it must work. That must be what happens. And it's simple to teach, and it's simple to go through those sort of moves to help someone with that in that way. But it doesn't work. It only works in mild cases and likely to sort of disable OCD to some level. But it certainly doesn't get under it fully. If it did, by definition, we would know that forums and Facebook groups wouldn't have many people in them, because it's a pretty simplistic idea to understand, but it doesn't work like that, because OCD finds a way around that very fast, which is, what if it's not just a thought? What if it's a real event? But I've actually just been told by the doctor I've got another disease, and I'm scared about that now, and I can't stop panicking. It's like the video that Alexander, who's in Ukraine at the moment, did 2 days ago. He said, I'm in a war zone. He said, I'm very scared of being in a war zone. But I go into OCD forums and tell people I've got OCD, I'm scared of being in a war zone. Everyone's saying that thoughts are thoughts. He said, it's not a bloody thought, I'm in an actual war zone. Until people with OCD are taught how to change their relationship with real events, recovery isn't coming out of the dark. Because real events come along and they throw a spanner in the works. If you suddenly get a disease, not OCD, and you've just learned about thoughts or thoughts changing relationship with OCD, you haven't got many tools for learning to bring that down, to bring that fear down in relation to that new scenario. That is what stoicism and rational thinking is all about, because you're learning to not be anxious in those situations too. That's setting you up for what I call robust recovery. I have to be really clear about that, because it gets misinterpreted all the time. And people think, oh, if I just learn to leave thoughts there, I'm then sorted. Well, no, because if something does come along like that and you're not able to bring the fear down, that does keep firing up, like the Korzybski quote that's in the second Albert Ellis book, A Myth of Self-Esteem, where he says, God may forgive your sins, but your nervous system won't. This isn't a religious quote. It was written at a time when the world was obviously a lot more religious. It's a quote to describe the fact that your nervous system, if you've got a fear of a false memory or a real event or something, doesn't let go. It's like, well, I'm not going to turn that down in case that risk's too big, in case I can see that I don't need to be chronically anxious. So I'll just keep fired up all the time for now. Well, that can mean the rest of your life, because it's not going to go down. So hence why I was chronically guilty on some level and chronic shame on some level for many, 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 many years, until I got under it with a deeper level of acceptance. So it released. I don't experience any chronic guilt or chronic anxiety now. Before, it was always simmering, going up loads, but down to a simmering level and staying there to some degree, pretty much all the time. And if you have OCD, you know that feeling completely. So I've got to be clear about those things, because with raising OCD awareness and trying to change OCD, you've got to be clear, not about just raising awareness of how to help people recover from OCD, but what doesn't work and what does work and why. I can answer any questions in relation to OCD and anything that I do and work on and how we approach things, because I get asked those questions hundreds of times a day through the Facebook group, WhatsApp and stuff like that. So everything that I work on is being constantly questioned by all the people that have OCD, because it's the doubting disorder, and so we question every part. So we go, okay, why is that not working? Have I done enough exposures? Why am I still anxious? Why am I still guilty? How do I improve this? How do I improve that? That's the nature of the disorder. The same as somebody who's decided to bring out a new product in the marketplace, people who are in the team and other companies that are in the space are going to say, well, what do you think of that product and how does that working and what is that doing? So you've got to be able to build robust recovery when you've got to be able to build something that can be questioned from all angles, because who's going to question it? OCD. Why? It's the doubting disorder. If it didn't work, there would be a way that OCD would be able to keep with chronic anxiety and chronic guilt persisting 24/7. So we have to specifically develop something, a mental framework, for it not to be attacked 24/7. So that's what's so important. Now I can look at the way that people are being helped with OCD by so many different books and just instantly say, well, that's not going to work because of ... I could say so many. You can think of famous phrases that you hear: relabel, reattribute, move on from a particular thought. Well, that's not actually going to work in a lot of chronic OCD. That won't work because you can't relabel something you're utterly convinced is real. So it just doesn't. So I spent years reading those type books over and over and over and over and over and not improving. Well, that's going to work for mild OCD and you'll be able to get through the gears on some level. But when it's like real event, false memory, latched on 24/7 for a long time, that's not going to work. That sort of relabeling, moving on, doesn't work. And that's a common concept that's seen through many books in anxiety and OCD. It just doesn't work. And that often makes it difficult because if someone says to me, what do you think of this book? A lot, which I have had those situations where it's been with the actual author, I can't exactly say, well, my normal answer is, yes, I think the book is great in terms of understanding OCD in lots of parts, but it doesn't deliver the result while the person's buying the book. The person's buying the book to recover, and it doesn't deliver that, and here's why. The problem is, with OCD, you can't kid it. You can't make it wishy-washy. So things that are too light, don't do it. Now, of course, they're going to work for a number of people who are then going to be utterly convinced, it's just thoughts of thoughts, that work for me. And then they tell someone else, it's like, well, obviously it isn't, because that guy has been in sort of 3 hospitals for OCD, and he's had probably about 200 sessions or 100 sessions over 10 years, and he's not better. Well, there's a reason why he's not better. The reason why he's not better is because what worked for you worked because OCD was milder and didn't have that grip, and his situation's different. When you've got something that's like POCD, real event, false memory, latched for a very, very long time, it doesn't release that simplistically. If it did, we'd have been released. And the journey is specifically going through the gears, seeing, that book hasn't worked. But we kid ourselves. I've spent years reading one ebook in the past that talked about constant distraction. It was a hugely famous ebook about 15, 16 years ago. And it still is, talking about being constantly distracted. And I had to tell the author of that book at the time, because I was very annoyed, that the book definitely did not work. And telling everyone to be constantly distracted is avoidance. And they spend their whole life trying to run from OCD and run from anxiety. And that definitely does not work. But it's understandable someone could think that, because it will work for some mild cases where they play the guitar or go for a run a lot and then they watch a film and then they go out with their friends and family. Important life structure things that we need to do as part of bringing it for the ride, which I often talk about. But that's not going to bring relief to chronic anxiety and chronic OCD if the person's fear is latched 24/7 in the background. I've been to plenty of concerts, played plenty of music, gone out on many nights. We know what it feels like. It's latched, simmering in the background, often turning up the heat at those events, trying to attack us. So it doesn't work. But I have to be clear about it and say, that doesn't work. The same as if someone said to me, that doesn't work there, then I have to think, why doesn't that work? Obviously that hasn't been the case, because what we're teaching is based off the backing of Stoicism and rational thinking, which is basically just reality, learning to see reality as it is, instead of all the irrational thinking that goes around it. So it's scientifically proven that it works. A box of chocolates isn't scary in of itself. It's a box cardboard with chocolates inside it. the idea that it could be scary for whatever irrational reason. I've only picked a box of chocolates as an analogy to describing it, but let's say if it was a spider, that it's going to crawl all over you, loss of control, could bite you, but then you're not scared of other insects, animals, things that could bite you. So it's obviously some sensation of loss of control, this thing crawling all over you, and things associated with fears around that. That's what makes spiders scary in terms of shape and how old memories of them. But in reality, it's a creature trying to live its life, often gets whacked and killed, and it's trying to just live. So if you think of it like that, and then you think, well, when it crawls all over you, would you mind a dog crawling over you? No, don't mind that, and so on. And you break all these things down, there's nothing to fear. And that's what we're teaching. We're not teaching a secret method. We're teaching rational thinking, seeing life in reality, lots of understanding about OCD and how it operates, and changing our perspective with OCD and anxiety. Now that's key. And that then sets up the framework for recovery. What you've got to think about is you can't kid your brain into recover by telling it something that isn't true. And you've got to expect that things are going to happen in life events that you definitely didn't expect. And you need to have a solution to calm down from them too. And that's what you're learning. These are skills for life, not just for OCD recovery. That's what we teach. You're learning to make yourself calm in the face of adversity. You're learning to make yourself calm when you've got too much on the plate. You're learning to make yourself calm when you've got too much on the plate and you're having a bit of a setback with OCD. All of that. Why? Because those are the things that are going to happen in life when you've got OCD. I will cover this in more detail and variations of these topics over the next coming days, where I'll be doing lots of videos. I'm trying to be really focused on the specific parts of the journey to help people understand exactly what's going on in those things so they can see and understand how it's interacting in those ways and what's going on there. Instead of things just being sort of overlooked or very wishy-washy, which most OCD information usually is. We all know that. We've been told for years, thoughts are thoughts, don't worry about it, that's unlikely, you're the last person to ever do that, over and over. Important parts of the early parts of the journey, realizing, yes, that's unlikely to happen, but then after that becomes a constant reassurance cycle. Guys, great to see you all on here. I will be back on very soon. Take it easy, guys. See you later.